It's January 8th, 1999. Behind the video camera is Paula Jabloner of the Historical Museums of San Jose, who kindly has offered to do our video work today. My name is Mark Thomas, and it's my privilege to be able to interview retired Judge Albert DeMarco. Now, just briefly before we start the questionings, Judge DeMarco went to Santa Clara Law School, graduated in 1938, practiced in San Jose, then you went on the San Jose Municipal Court, San Jose Alviso Municipal Court in 1960, went to the Superior Court in 61, and retired in 1980. Am I right?
1981, I think.
81, okay. Let me ask you this first then. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Born in San Jose, and I was raised in San Jose. I'm still residing here, of course.
What part of San Jose did you grow up?
Part of San Jose I was raised in was the on 4th Street, the North 4th Street area.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to San Jose High School, and I didn't go to any of the Catholic schools. I went to San Jose High for the 4 years, and then I went to the University of Santa Clara.
And then you got out of undergrad in 35?
Well, yes, I got the undergraduate work was in the class of 35. I majored at that time in political science, and I had a Bachelor of Science degree in 35. And then the LLB, I graduated and then went to law school. You had, if you wanted to, you could have taken law, as you know, in your senior year. Well, I opted to go to the law school after I graduated, and I got out of law school in 1938.
Okay. Well, I noticed that in your law school class was Louis Dahl. Louis
Dahl was there.
Who later on also became a municipal court judge. He was one of the great characters. Was he a character in law school also?
I think all of us in law school were characters in a sense. I remember that how it got me, I didn't hear the dean say this, but someone had made mention that anyone coming into the school that tries to anyway mimic the class of 38 or do what they did would be immediately expelled. And I used to think about the past escapades we had. There was Louis Dahl, Dick McCormick, who incidentally, after the war, went in with C.J. Robinson, I think, in Stockton, and Dick became one of the state's greatest trial lawyers. He did mostly defense work. And there was Dick McCormick, Jay Marnrich, John Davis. I don't know whether you knew Jack Davis. He went in, San Jose went in with Ed Fellows. Stan Hasbrook went to the bank, and there was also, let's see, Jack O'Hara, who also went to the bank in San Francisco. And that's about all I could.
What about taking the bar at that time? Where did they give the bar?
They gave the bar in San Francisco. And we all met after, well, we were waiting for results. We met at my house where I lived on 4th Street. And we were getting together there at the time. And Jack Davis came in with the information. He had a long face, and we wondered which one was in front. I think the entire class passed with the exception of one, Dick McCormick. And I think I know why Dick didn't pass the first time. He, when we went up there, was, as you know, it's a 3-day examination. And Dick was always worried whether he answered the problem right. And he'd start maybe getting to a question. We all told him, let's lay off and forget it. It's going to hurt us. And Dick kept, and I think that hurt him in a way. But well, he passed immediately when he took the second time.
Now, when you passed, then you went into practice in San Jose?
When I passed, let's put it this way, I tried to get into the practice. There were, none of us had an opportunity to get in any of the offices that where there, I think we all went around to see what we could do, but nothing seemed to be available. There was myself, Bill Summers, Jim Armitage, Louis Dahl, who else was that? Joe Paul Marino.
You're all looking for jobs.
All looking for jobs.
Well, at that time, I assume that the Lewis O'Neill firm was a big firm.
Lewis O'Neill firm was probably the biggest firm that we had there, and most of the fellows there was, I mean, the great lawyers of my time that I remember was H.A. Gabriel. There was T.T. Jenkins, you probably heard of him. Owen D. Richardson, who was quite an attorney, and Jensen and Holstein. Right down the line, and archivist Speciale, who was a wonderful man, Dick Bersani.
You went right down the line, but no vacancies or no jobs.
I think all of us offered to do their research, serve their papers. Later on, we began to get opportunities to get into an office. And the first opportunity I had to get into an office was in Frank Benson's office. That then was Benson and Leland, Herbert Leland from Los Gatos, who did mostly probate work. And Frank was he was a retired legislator, and I don't recall what he was in the state senate or the state assembly. I think he was senator. And his wife was the court reporter for Judge James. You remember Lily Benson? Lily Benson,
yes.
Yeah, and so I got into that office.
And where was that office?
That was in the First National Bank building.
Well, now, this was, what, in 1939?
Oh, about then, yes.
Were virtually all the law offices either in the Bank of America or the First National Bank?
Well, practically all the offices were located that way, but they had the old buildings. You remember they had, what was the name of that building on Santa Clara Street?
Knox building?
I don't know what it was, but when you got on the elevator, there was a big bounce. You wondered whether it was going to make it or drop all of a sudden. It was quite an elevator. And then we had the old place where John Sullivan was up further on South First Street by San Fernando Street. I think they're trying to renovate that part of the building now.
Well, now, at that stage, now we're talking about 1939, 1940, where were the courts that you would do business?
The courts were in town. That is right across from you're not asking about the Superior Court.
Yes, sir, and the Muni Court.
And the Muni Court was behind it. You remember the Municipal Court was behind the Superior Court, and the jail was in between them, if you remember. And all of our work when we first started, and we didn't have an office, the only thing we depended on was the appointments in the criminal cases. And Judge James would make the appointment. Well, we had many problems with, for instance, about the best you could do. You never collected a fee. The only time I ever found anyone to collect a fee was Judge Zellmuno before he was, I think that was before he got into the legislature, or he might have been in. And he asked the fellow, one of the defendants, take off your shoes, and he found $25
in the shoe.
So he says, I'm taking that as the fee. Well, the rest of us, you tried to go to the family. Well, they were seriously involved. But these people around here, they were poor as church mice. There was nothing that they could really afford. And you're rather anxious to get in the trial. So some of the cases we tried, and many of them we pled guilty, worked with the probation department. And when there was a fee forthcoming, we worked our head off. And I think Judge James used to recognize when we were, because he was a kind of as you remember, he was well respected as a judge. And I got to him very close personally because he was a close friend of Frank Benson, and many things that they'd have notes between them when they were working, buying things in the stock market. I was more like a delivery boy. And he would treat all of the attorneys, the young lawyers, so well that, gee, he was the sort of he was the person we all looked up to.
Gentleman.
That's right. And if you got in any kind of a problem or something, you could always talk to him. We had enough sense not to try to talk about particular cases, but you'd always try to hint, gee, if we do something, we're going to probably get paid. He said, you are? He says,
well, now, the court didn't pay you anything?
Nothing. We didn't receive anything. Later on, the court paid, I think, $100 a defendant, but that was after my time. We began to make money then. We got on the appointments then.
When I was starting in '56, you'd get $25 for a preliminary examination and $180 for a 2-day trial. But don't try to get any more, because that's it. Then So when you had any court business, it was all right within that one block.
All in that one block.
And the Superior Court judges were all in the one building right across the street from the park there.
That's right.
I got you. Okay.
We had, let's see, at the time I went in, the three judges were Judge Sire, Judge Davison, Judge James, and then later on, well, this was, I think Del Mudolo, and he came on later, and John Foley came on later.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, let me ask you this. We were just looking, you have a ledger here, and we're talking about money and so forth. What were some of the fees that you charged? I know that you've got these.
Well, the fees that I don't ever recall collecting a consultation fee except once. And our fees, we had a sort of a schedule that was provided by our local bar association. And as I recall, I think it was $5 for a consultation. And I'll never forget the client that came in well, this was later on when I was in partners with Elmer DiMattei. I later left the office of Benson and went in partnership with Elmer DiMattei. And that's the time that these expenses were up, is when I was in office, in business for myself with Elmer. This fellow came in, he says, I said, all I want to pay is for a consultation. He says, but I have to have legal advice. I says, okay. So he sat down at the desk there, and I asked him what the problem was. He told me, and I gave him what I thought was the proper legal advice, and which I thought was very good advice. And he says, is that it? He says, yeah. He looks at his watch, and he says, you say $5 an hour? And he says, yeah. He reaches in his pocket and picks it. He comes out with a dime. He says, okay, thank you, counselor, and he puts the dime on the desk. He walks out. My mouth was open, and I figured, now what do you get? I should have saved that dime, but it was the darndest experience I ever had in my life. And I told Elmer about it. Elmer said, why don't you grab him, get your $5? I said, what the heck, well, I'd probably get arrested for assault and battery. I said, he looked like a pretty good old guy. I'll never, some of those things. How
long were you, starting, say, in 1939, how long were you in private practice?
Starting 39?
Yes,
well, from 39 on until I became a judge.
Okay, and you were always downtown?
Always downtown, yes.
Now, there's a couple of cases I wanted to ask you about. At one time, you had a case involving food machinery.
Yes. What Elmer and I, when we decided to get together, we moved in, I don't know whether you knew, H.A. Gabriel. Gabriel was, he had a reputation as being a specialist in municipal corporations and constitutional law, and he did also criminal work. And he had a good reputation. They would refer cases to him. Well, the food machinery case was referred to Gabe. And at that time, Elmer and I, we had just started. I forget when the case started. But the complaint was drawn. He used Elmer as a plaintiff, and I would go to court with Gabe to handle the case with him. And I wanted to learn from that. Well, Gabe got a stroke. I ended up with the case, which was a petition for writ of mandamus and certiorari to examine the sale where the city had sold the property on Coleman Avenue to food machinery. And our purpose was to declare the sale void because they did not follow what's required by the municipal code nor follow constitutional law. In other words, the regular writ of certiorari is a very, as you know, a very limited writ, and you have to show where they have not followed the procedures set up by themselves. Well, we were before Judge Foley, who, in my mind, was probably one of the greatest minds I've ever appeared before. And if you knew Judge Foley, ever tried cases before him, you knew that he was quite a great judge. Right. In fact, with Judge Foley, many times when he would write an opinion after deciding a case, and you take an appeal, the appellate court sometimes would use verbatim his opinion, and the Senate has the written opinion that they would adopt. And, well, anyway, Vic Chargan was one of the attorneys for food machinery. There was Bob Casson, who represented the city. Myself, I was ending up in that case alone because we took Gabe down a couple of times on a wheelchair, but there wasn't much he could do. And Vic began to tell me about different things that I was doing wrong, like, well, he says, you know, this is nothing but a harassment suit. The publicity in the paper was very bad. They were sustained, the demurs were sustained against me with leave to amend. Now, if they got one sustained without leave to amend, of course, they would have won the case. And Vic would tell me, he said, "You're flirting with this bar," all things like that, and I never was used to that. I was sort of running scared, but I decided I'm going to get everything I had, and I studied and studied and studied, and even Paul Davies was involved in the case. Ellistus Hayes, who owned the Mercury News, all the publicity was bad, and I kind of got the feeling, gee, these people just don't like me. If they could get me just to dismiss or something. So I got kind of mad. I told them, I said, I'm going to fight this thing out. I think they're just giving us a line. So we eventually ended up by being successful in the case before Judge Foley. And then I had a call from Vic, and he says, they don't know they're going to take an appeal. He said, but that didn't seem to make sense. He'd like to meet with me and see if we could work out. And I told him, I said, as far as I know, it'd be something quite simple. Just if you want to appeal, you appeal. I said, but you want to delay anything, just go back in the city and make the proper bid as required by the complaint that I filed. And he says, well, we'll probably do that. And he says, but we might meet, maybe, he says, you, he says, and Listus Hayes and Paul Davies. I said, look, Vic, if you want to meet as an attorney, I'll meet with you, but I'm not going into any meeting with those other two fellows. I just got bitter about it. So that thing, I was very proud of the result in the case. And that was a sort of the beginning where our office, even though Gabe was with the problem, he came out of the stroke a little bit, but not enough to handle that kind of business. And whenever it came in, I would be, and I think Elmer and I, from then on, we began to move up in different cases that we had.
What about the Marino case?
Well, that was a case of Marino versus Valenti. That case was, the complaint, I think, was filed, as I recall, by Jack Shargan. And Jack says he's a pretty weak case on the liability. He says, you think you could do something with it? He said, I'll go ahead and send it over to you. He's like, you could have the case. And what it was, there were, I think, 4 children that were involved. One was killed. It was the sort of explosion of dynamite caps, and 3 were blinded, totally blinded by the explosion. It was very bad injuries. And what had happened, they had, there was the pump house building, which was behind the fence. The kids jumped the fence and went into the old pump building. They got these caps, and as they dynamite caps, they began to fondle and so forth, and they exploded. And what happened, of course, one was killed, the other was blinded. And so the suit was against Valenti, and one of the people, I remember the name of Marino versus Valenti. They were Mexican children. So we went to trial before Judge Delmulo. Morris Rankin and John Longinotti represented the defendant. And I was with Tom Fitzgerald, who I went to law school with. I asked Tom to come down if he'd like to help in the case, and he said, gee, it looks like a good case. We might be able to work something out with it. Well, we had, in Dell's court, Dell gave a directed verdict against us. We took an appeal. We filed the appeal and got before the district court, and then all the attorneys received word from the University of California that they would like to be present at the oral arguments if we were going to have oral arguments. And we decided we'd let them come in on the thing. Well, we went down to the district court, and it was probably the most scary experience I ever had. Now, you have these 3 justices that were up there asking questions, and I didn't intend to argue that day. Fitz was going to argue on our side, and Morris Rankin was going to argue for the defendants. And I noticed all of a sudden that Justice Peters, you know, heard of Justice Peters, was asking questions from the cases that we cited, but apparently they read everything, even in the case which we did read everything too, but we weren't that well versed as they were. And I'll never forget I was asking Fitz, I had just briefed a law review article on the subject that we were handling, that we should have, instead of the trespasser being, that's how we were non-suited, because they claimed the children were trespassers, and as you know, the old law was that you cannot have available to you the doctrine of attractive nuisance if you are a trespasser. Well, and Fitz, I was pulling to give him this thing from that I had written on from the law reviews I read from the University of California, and Justice Peters says, well, he says, Mr. Fitzgerald, he says, your colleague there, he says, seems to be wanting to say something. I don't know, I could hardly get on my knees, were shaky as heck, and so I didn't know how to accept, I figured I'm going to stick to the law review article anyway. So I was arguing from that, and Peters looks at me and he says, well, he says, Mr. DeMarco, would you want us to overturn the case of Puckta versus something? It was a lumber company. He says, that's just a recent ruling. He says, that's against you. And I says, Your Honor, I says, I would submit that if you had the same facts before you then as you have now, I said, I don't think you would have ruled that way. And he looked at me. The other, one of the, I can't think of his name, the third justice down, he looks at Peters like this and gives him a grin to say, maybe that'll shut you up. So they let me up. Then we got to notice that we had won the case. Whoa. And Morris Rankin, you know, he complimented me on it. So then we were going back to trial. Then I found out, and although I saw the guy, I didn't, my mother told me, I guess the guy talked about it to him. They says, you know, she says, why are you in on that case against Mr. Valenti? He was the fellow that had a delicatessen, an Italian delicatessen, and I thought, gee, the poor guy didn't have that much money, even if we wanted. So I asked Fitz, I said, I'm going to drop out. I said, it doesn't look like we're going to make too much even if we win. In those days, you know, you didn't get big judgments, especially for kids. It's like even the death cases, you remember how little you would get?
Yeah.
So I got out of it, and Fitz went on. The last thing I heard was I talked to Morris about it later, and I don't know whether they settled it or whether Fitz lost it, but I don't think that Fitz won it because I didn't receive any referral fee, nor did Jack.
I got you. Now, I had mentioned a minute ago about your fees. Say you saw, you have some other stuff in this ledger book here about how much you charge for a particular...
Well, I have here in the ledger book different cases that... Let's see, what's this?
Like one of them, I think, was something for $35 for some transaction and $50.
Here's well, here's one about $85 for a criminal case on Carolina. That was the.
And then I think, and also in your expenses, did your monthly phone bill was $5, something like that?
Yeah, our divorce actions. I think we at the time, if we had any of those, would be $100. But most of these things, the big fees were always that would be a big fee for us. But the other fees, like $25, maybe contract, even gone to the Muni Court, you didn't get much of a fee for that. The
telephone is $3.25. That must have been a month. Right.
This. Yeah, on telephone. Oh, here's the example. Here's a typewriter repair, 1062. Office. This was in August of '43. Office rent $16.25. Legal paper $1.64, and stamps $5.
God.
What happened? You see, we had, first of all, Elmer and I had the joint user phone with Gabe. And then with the rent, the office, that was in the Bank of America. So Elmer and I we put 2 desks in the same office. So if a client would come to see Elmer, I'd disappear and walk around town and figure, well, we must be through by now and go back. And we do that for each other. We would give that courtesy to each other. And we stayed there for quite some time because our rent and I used to do the typing, because I was a fast typer, though we didn't have a secretary. And there was always someone in the office to So everything we made was real cold cash, and we didn't, although we charged our fees were, along with other young lawyers, they were great, but we certainly made our money off.
I got you. Well, now, you went to the municipal court then in 1960. How did you happen to get to the municipal court?
Well, the thing is, I was appointed to the municipal court by Governor Brown. And what happened, how I got into that situation, Knapp Menard was appointed as a Superior Court judge. And Knapp, I remember, I would say that of all the attorneys I knew, the district attorneys, Knapp Menard was probably the greatest, and he was a friend of mine. And I don't know if you've ever seen Knapp Menard try a case, but the man was a master at it. I mean, you take this Simpson case today that they talk so much about, you'd get a conviction with a man like Knapp. Knapp was honest, fair, clean, everything except when he was on a criminal case, you had an awful time if he was going to be the trial lawyer. Well, I went into Knapp, before Knapp, on a divorce action, and it was a question, not a divorce, it was a custody matter involving a young woman. I think 2 children were involved at the time, and who at that time, of course, you know how we believe in our cases, the husband, in my estimation, was no good. Knapp gave the custody to the husband, and I
okay, we're going to have to stop for the next tape. Okay, we were talking about this custody case.
And I walked out there talking to myself, and I was so mad, and I happened to be walking back to the office, and Frank Custer, did you remember Frank?
Sure.
I told Frank, I said, you know, I got a darn good idea that, I said, son of a gun, I feel like giving Matt Knapp opposition. I wonder what the devil he did this for. He said, well, he says, why don't you try it? He says, you're going to get some backing. He said, I think the Bar Association, you might make it there, the attorneys would vote. And then I talked to a couple of guys, said, gee, why don't you try? He said, it won't hurt anything. Well, I thought, gee, but running against Knapp, I said, he's a friend of mine. He said, well, they'll understand. He said, this is politics. So I declared. And after I declared, then you start getting people that are going to come in to help, especially financial help and so forth. Well, they came in with publicity that they wanted to have me use, and I looked it all over, and I thought, my gosh, I don't like the implication that's coming from this. And I said, I don't want to use it. And he says, well, gee, so you won't have a chance. I said, that's the chance I have to take. Maybe I shouldn't file. So then the expenses began to get up, and we didn't get too many contributions, except what Bob Welch was able to get for me and others that came. And then after that, I lost the election, of course. And I saw Knapp, and I said, well, I hope there's no hard feelings. And he said, you know, there wouldn't be. And I said, well, it's okay. So I went ahead and just forgot it all, and then I was contacted by a fellow to ask me. He said, gee, says, would you like to get an appointment on the muni bench? He says, there's an opening. He says, Percy O'Connor is going to retire, and you can take his place. I said, well, not exactly. I says, I don't want to, I said, the problem is you get on the muni court, you never get off. I says, my ambition is if I take a judgeship, I would rather be on the Superior Court. He says, well, this could possibly happen within the year. You might be elevated there. Well, so I took the Muni Court job, and I fell in love with it. In fact, so much so that Tony Nobby says, well, he says, when I was appointed to the Superior Court, he said, you'll go there. He said, but I think you're going to come back. It's a different ball game. And what he meant by that was that there's more opportunities when you're a Muni judge to visit, and your friends, and you become very close. Although when I went on the Superior Court bench, why they didn't have to, I came in as Department 13, the new department. And that we would meet at the Oyster Loaf, and I was very lucky and very fortunate to be associated with colleagues like I had on the Superior Court.
Now, when you were in the Muni Court, you were in the Hall of Justice there?
Yes.
On Market Street?
Right.
And there, were the 3 of you?
There was myself, Judge Casson, Judge Miller, Judge Dempsey, I think Ed Nelson. Ed Nelson and I, in fact, were sworn in as many judges by Judge Miller on the same day.
Now, was Louis Dahl on the bench as yet?
No, he
Okay.
was not on the bench.
I got you. And then in '61, you went to Superior Court.
Yes.
And then you were sitting in the courthouse right opposite the park there, the
Yes.
Superior Court. I got you.
And the first case they sent me, oh, what a Billy. You ever hear of the Sunnyvale brick case?
No.
I don't know how long that case was going around, but there were about 7 lawyers. It was going to be a court case. It lasted 6 months. And that was when they built the public buildings in Sunnyvale. Someone found, they tried to make a test on the walls, which were brick walls. And they found that the inside bricks weren't joining properly. So everyone sued everyone else. In other words, the city came in on it, the general sued the sub, the bricklayers sued this, the architects were sued. And they must have had about 7 lawyers. It ended up that the reason I brought it up is one of the things that happened there. One of the fellows that testified for one of the parties was the author of a book on design, laying of bricks, and so forth. He was quite an expert on it. And John Burnett was cross-examining him, and John was reading from the book, so he wanted to deduce a page from the book. Well, an objection was made, and I sustained the objection because the whole book can't come in, you know. So John says, well, what's the objection? He told me, well, he said, you have the whole book there. And I said, well, I've sustained the objection. There's no sense of arguing about it. So John tears a page out of the book, and this guy's on the witness stand. He says, that's my book. That's one of the originals. You had no right to do that. John reaches in his pocket. He takes out $5. He puts it on my desk. And I says, what's this for? He says, that's for the payment of the page. And oh, gee, and all, I had to call a recess. Anyway, the case was, I finally decided the case. And the thing I like about the case is I asked them, how long is it going to take you fellas to get up findings? Because they all wanted findings and fact conclusions of law. I says, that'll take another 3 months. I had already gone 6 months. I says, forget it, I'll make up my own findings. And the thing I liked about it was that none of them took an appeal. So I felt very, with the opinion I wrote and the findings I made, so that stopped them all.
What floor were you on in the courthouse?
I was on the, I think the 2nd floor with the brick case.
Oh.
And we had a special room because I had to have a special room for all the bricks they were introducing and evidence to show what happened. Oh.
You had some condemnation case that was of particular interest.
Oh, that was the condemnation case involving the church on River Street, Holy Family Church. And we had that was a jury trial. It was very, very interesting. And at that time, of course, they didn't have instructions on many on condemnation. We had to work our own out. There was Mattioni, I think, that represented the city redevelopment agency, I guess, or the city of San Jose. I forget now how the plaintiff was listed. And Jerry Hansen represented the Archbishop, which is a corporation. So we went through the case, and I'll never forget, Mattioni brought in evidence, and had a person testify from the University of California in Berkeley, a bearded fellow, a young fellow, that was supposed to be an expert on Catholic canon law. And this was at the time when the Catholic Church had the Ecumenical Council. And John Burnett came to look at, to see what was going on in the case. Well, during the recess, John walks up and he says, holy mackerel, he says, what kind of a case is this? He says, I feel like I'm sitting in church with the church hierarchy deciding what is the proper canon law. The problem was we had to go through the masses, what were being allowed, and the design of the church, because as you remember, the old Holy Family Church, it was a Romanesque type of building, and we had to get, the Mattioni wanted to get in evidence some of these Protestant churches that weren't quite as expensive as the old Catholic churches. So we're having appraisers on standby while we decide on what we're going to use for comparables. And that's why we got that fellow. He was supposed to, he introduced him as I qualified him as an expert in canon law, and he was very, very knowledgeable. They didn't bring anybody from the Archbishop. I guess they figured it would be too biased or prejudiced.
Can we pause for a minute?
Sure.
I want to make sure.
I don't remember the name of the case, but the facts of the case, to my best recollection, were that this woman early one morning got up and she shot her husband on one side of the head and then went on the other side of the bed and shot him again. And Jack London from, you remember Jack London from, with Mountain View or Sunnyvale, I think Mountain View he's practiced, was the defense counsel. And all the evidence was pointed toward this terrible abuse, wife abuse that occurred. And one of the witnesses that we had there was Dr. Rappaport. And when the hypothetical, and he was for the defense, and when the hypothetical question was asked him, I don't know if you know Dr. Rappaport, but he would listen in a long, long hypothetical question, and he would, the badge, he'd act out in his face. And the defense was that she did not commit a conscious act. And Rappaport ended up by saying, says, that woman no more killed this man consciously than you or I. She did not commit a conscious, and boy, the jury bought it and they acquitted the woman. Well, after that, I think that whether it had a forelady or a foreman, one of the jurors who lived in Saratoga wanted to give a big barbecue. And she invited everybody, including the prosecutor and including myself. I said, well, I can't go. I said, this isn't proper for me to go to something like that. I said, that's almost like a celebration. But I understood that the prosecutor went there. Well, the next week when he happened to appear in my chambers, he had a case that was coming up for trial. I said, how'd you like the barbecue? He said, gee, he says, all he talked about was the trial. He says, I almost felt like digging up the son of a bitch and shooting them all over again. And they did acquit her. It was really something.
You have a gavel. Tell me the story of this gavel.
Well, this gavel was given to me by a friend who became acquainted with through buying gasoline from him on Hamilton Avenue. He had a gas station, and he was also very close to the building in Hamilton and San Tomas where the FBI was stationed, and he had many friends there, and he had judge friends and so forth. So Johnny gave me this when I went on to the Superior Court.
Oh, that's very nice.
We became close friends, and I liked to go over his house many times, especially at Christmas time, to get the Italian case that his wife was able to.
Let me read something to you. This is a quote from you to a newspaper person, and this is about advice to attorneys. And you said, and I want you to comment if you would, get into the books. Be very well prepared at all times. Be sure that that any impression that you create with the court stems from the fact that you've really done your homework and you've really worked on your case. Is that your advice to lawyers or young lawyers or lawyers in general?
Well, that, and of course I could elaborate on it a bit, that would be, you have to, I learned when I became successful, we never had a trial association at that time, but when I was trying cases, the fees were getting bigger and bigger because I was trying even for other lawyers. And what I used to do would be well prepared. With the witnesses, you'd have your investigators check the witnesses, but always be prepared on the law and the evidence and what you wanted to do. And don't worry about the criticism that lawyers get, because they're always going to be criticized. And just like with me, myself today, it's rather odd that, well, along with that advice, it's rather odd that attorneys have such poor reputations, and when we all know that we have to trust them after our death, that is one of the highest trust you could have. And they have many lawyers that could do that. Practically all of our lawyers who are practicing law have the ability to do that. And you always come up with the case, well, you represent, you know the person is guilty, why do you represent them? I had to answer that one time to it. Have you got any more time on this?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, this happened to be when I was practicing law. it was an abortion case, and it was a Mexican woman. She had a I got a call from Bart Collins when he knew I was on the case. He says, "You're on a loser, Al." I says, "Why?" He says, "We've got her confession, and we've got our witness." He says, "is undercover agent from the department." And I says, "Well,
This is when you were defense attorney?
When I was defense attorney for her." So I took the case and asked for jury trial, and we decided to try the case. I couldn't make any deals because it was a state prison offense. In those days, if you committed an abortion, it was a felony. Well, I started on the case, and I noticed that the only witness that they had was the undercover agent. And what I did, the code provided that you cannot convict without corroborative evidence independent of the witness who will be testifying as to the fact that they know their own knowledge. And you can't introduce the confession to be the corroboration. So after Margaret Morton produced everything, I sat, and that time Louis Dahl was in the DA helping Margaret. I just rested my case. And Judge Foley, I, and Margaret Morton, he says, "Are you going to present anything?" I says, "No." I says, "You can't have a conviction." I says, "Because there's nothing that you could convict on." I says, "You cannot convict on the testimony of the undercover agent." And Judge Foley says, "I think you're right." He said, "But now what do we do?" He says, he says, "as a judge," he says, "cannot decide a question of fact. That's exclusively within the province of the jury." And he says, "I can't give a directed verdict because it doesn't meet the problem either." The case cannot, the conviction cannot be granted. He said, so we tried to find out what to do, and Foley finally said, "I think what I have to do," he says, "is to give the jury an advisory opinion by way of an instruction that as far as the court is concerned, there is no evidence to convict this woman on, but that you as jurors are the exclusive judges of the fact." He says, "You can either accept my opinion or follow your own in accordance with the instructions I give you and make your own verdict." And so they did come out with a verdict of not guilty. Well, after that, I go to St. Mary's Church, and who should be the subject of the homily? I guess we should have been excommunicated, Judge Foley and myself at the Catholic Church. And I thought, gee, I didn't want to talk if I could never make him understand. So I analyzed it myself, because that now became something that was personal to me, and my conscience was bothering me. Just to get the fee, did I handle that case? So I began to try to justify myself, and I came across an article written, it was in the Stanford Law Review, and it was, I think Justice Jackson, he was on the Supreme Court of the United States, before the students of Stanford University. And the gist of his talk was that you as attorneys, remember this, he says, you are going to represent many people who are guilty, no doubt, and he says, but you are advocates. You are not to pass judgment. He says, you have to give them the benefit of all the law that's available to them. And I figured, well, the available law here was a rule of evidence. So I did nothing wrong, and I satisfied my own conscience in doing that. And I think that's what attorneys, some of the young people should realize, because you can get upset sometimes. Should I take this fee? I know the guy is guilty. Well, you explain to him what you have to do, what your limitations are, so that you do not get yourself involved in cases involving subornation of perjury, which is something that if you help in any way to mislead, you could be subject to disbarment. And I have had a case in my court where attorneys are really treading a very, very thin line on some of that stuff. So, and I thought to myself, well, that's one of the reasons why people should forget criticizing lawyers as much as they do, because that is something that they have a duty. You can't send a client out of your office and say, I'm sorry. You might be a very good lawyer on procedures and what's available by way of criminal law, but give the party the benefit of the expense that you could afford to give him and what your ability prompts you to do and so forth.
I don't think we can top that. Al, thank you most kindly. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I hope I didn't make a jackass out of myself.
No, you didn't.
No.
You were wonderful, I thought. Didn't you think, Paul?
It was wonderful.
I thought you were fabulous.
I don't know. Well, they did something on that Lamson case that Elmer Jensen was in on in the beginning, not in the case, but he represented the wife where she was beaten one time, I think. Yeah, that's...
You never ever heard of a judge in San Francisco by the name of, in Monterey by the name of Sargent, did you? He was, I think, passed away before your time.
No.
Do you remember Clarence Coolidge?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did he have a brother, Ed?
No, the only thing I thought he had was his sister, who was Mrs. In fact, she was our principal at Jefferson School.
Well, let me ask you this. Is Edwin a synonym for Clarence? Because there's an Edwin Coolidge listed as being a professor real early in the history, and I can't find any other reference to Edwin Coolidge. And I assume he would have been a brother or something, but if you never heard of a brother,
no,
I'm beginning to think it was a misprint. Maybe there was just 1 year is listed.
Could be a misprint. That's cool. Well, I'm just going to say I probably bring up to Mary Spaghetti. He was with Coolidge for a while, wasn't he? I don't know the marriage.